You want to learn jazz guitar, but you don't want to waste practice time. So let's start with some things that you should not spend time on in the beginning. Don't learn modes, because most jazz is not modal. It's not about isolated chords next to each other. It's about harmony flowing through a song or progression. Don't learn full arpeggio positions, because most jazz lines use 1-octave arpeggios. So that's also what you want to practice. And this also explains why you don't want to practice arpeggio inversions. You don't really need them. Practice the things that you can use in your solos. Now, I already saved you a year of technique practice and you haven't played a note yet, but let's look at what you should be doing in your practice. I'll explain this first using arpeggios and then move it over to chords as well. Jazz is often made way too complicated with a lot of theory, and instead you want to know a bit of basic theory and how it all fits together, because that's incredibly powerful. You'll see what I mean. I just told you not to practice arpeggio positions, but how do you then practice arpeggios? Now, one thing that's very difficult with learning jazz is that you practice all these separate things like scales, arpeggios, and licks, and then you have to spend a lot of time getting it all to fit together. Let me show you a gigantic shortcut for this, something that I learned from Barry Harris. In jazz, the arpeggios that make up the harmony are the 7th chords. Those are the basic chords that you'll see in the songs that you want to play. Now, later in this video, I'm going to show you how to connect several arpeggios to each chord. Here's a systematic and easy step-by-step way to start learning them. An arpeggio is a part of a scale, so start by just practicing the scale. Chords and arpeggios are built by stacking third intervals in the scale. So to ease into playing arpeggios, practice playing those third intervals, which is this exercise. And if you stack 2 third intervals, then you get a basic triad, which is the first basic chord that you want to check out. And now adding another third on top gives you the 7th chords, and you're just gradually getting them into your fingers step by step. Like this, you can play all the 7th chord arpeggios in the scale, and you can go through this process with any scale that you want to use. You should also try to play through the arpeggios of the songs or chord progressions to have an overview of them for when you're soloing. And of course, work on combining arpeggios with the scale and other vocabulary, which is how you want to end up using them in your solos. Here I'm adding an enclosure and a chromatic run to a C major 7 arpeggio. I have another video that really digs into how to make licks by starting with an arpeggio. I'll link to that in the video description. But another essential point is to have more arpeggios that you can use over each chord, which is very efficient since you're anyway practicing all the arpeggios. Let's look at that. In the beginning, you want to focus on making lines with the arpeggio of the chord itself. So for a 2-5-1, you want to use the arpeggios of each chord. The basic exercise will be this. And then you take that material and work on turning that into jazz licks, which could give you something like this. There are only so many things that you can do with one arpeggio for each chord, and it's difficult to make many great sounding lines. But luckily, there are more options for arpeggios. To understand how the other arpeggios work, you need to understand why arpeggios work in the first place. Now, luckily, that's pretty simple. If you're soloing over a D minor 7 chord and you use the D minor 7 arpeggio, then you're using the same notes as the chord you're playing over. And that's of course why that sounds good. With that logic, it's pretty easy to find other arpeggios that also work. You need arpeggios that have a lot of notes in common with the chord and also add other notes that sound good over the chord. I'm going to show you 4 types of this. Some of them work most of the time, some of them only in a few places, and then one that really sounds great but pretty much only works for one chord. But then that's probably Barry Harris' favorite arpeggio. After that, I'm gonna apply this to chords as well. If you look at the notes of a C major 7 arpeggio, so C, E, G, and B, then you can see that the diatonic arpeggio from the third of the chord, E, is an E minor 7 arpeggio, E, G, B, and D. And here you have three notes in common with the C major 7, because the three top notes of C major 7 are E, G, and B. And then you're adding the D, which is a ninth on top of the major 7. But the ninth is a great sound on a major 7 chord. So this is a great arpeggio to use in your solos. You could play something like this. This works for all the chords in the 2-5-1, so D minor 7 to G7 to C major 7. Now I'm going to discuss some examples where it's less effective in a bit, but for that 2-5-1 you get over the D minor 7, an F major 7 arpeggio, over the G7 you get B half diminished, and as you already saw, over C major 7 you have the E minor 7. And now you can mix the different arpeggios, making it easier to make lines that flow. Something like this. The chords where using the arpeggio from the third is more difficult are the ones where the ninth in the scale doesn't sound good on the chord. So that would be E minor 7 and B half diminished, which both have a flat 9. That doesn't mean that it's impossible to use them, but it's not where you want to start. Instead, let's just look at some other options. With the arpeggio from the third, you're using the arpeggio that shares the three top notes of the chord, but you can also sometimes use the one that shares the lowest three notes. And this works really great for a C major 7. So the arpeggio that will share the three lowest notes would be A minor 7. So A, C, E, and G, which of course shares C, E, and G with C major 7. And you can use that in a line like this. This is the arpeggio from the 6th of the chord, and that works the best on major 7 chords in the scale. So an A minor 7 arpeggio over C major 7 and a D minor 7 arpeggio over F major 7. It gets complicated with the other chords. The next one is great for both the 2 and the 5 chords and also has melodic motion built in, which is a really nice effect. And then we of course still need to check out Barry Harris' favorite arpeggio. After the arpeggio from the third of the chord, exploring the next note in the chord, the 5th, makes a lot of sense. Now here you have a few useful options. The most common ones are for the 2 and the 5 chords, and the arpeggios do one thing really well. They target the third of the chord. So notice how the A minor 7 arpeggio is really framing the F on the 2 chord D minor 7. And also how the D minor 7 arpeggio is really framing the third B on the G7 chord. Keep in mind that I'm not thinking of these arpeggios as substitutions. It's really useful to start thinking strange chord progressions that are anyway not what you're hearing in the music. So get used to using the other arpeggios as something that goes on top of the chord, which I think is also how, for example, Barry Harris describes them. I think that makes a lot more sense. And of course, if you don't agree and you want to shout at me about minor conversion, there's a comment section as well. One of the arpeggios that Barry Harris talks about and uses quite often is the arpeggio on the flat 7 of the dominant. Now this is of course not exclusive to him. Most people use this one quite often. And in this key, that's an F major 7 arpeggio over the G7 chord. And that's the foundation of a lot of Charlie Parker and George Benson licks as well. Applying these principles to chords only works when you're using complete 4-note chords, so it's not useful for things like shell voicings, but it's really great for stuff like drop 2 voicings. So if you take a 2-5-1 with basic drop 2 voicings as a starting point, then that gives you this. And here you can also use the voicings from the third of each chord in the progression, which would then give you a 9th as an extension. So on the D minor 7, you can use an F major 7 voicing like this. And in the context, that's going to sound like a D minor 7 with a 9. Now, the chord on the third of G7 is B half diminished. And the chord on the third of the C major 7 is E minor 7. And that gives you this much more colorful progression. So you can also reuse voicings from different chords and in that way not spend time learning them as new grips, in the same way that you can get a lot more out of the diatonic arpeggios that you practiced in the scale. The important thing then becomes that you develop your skills in making the arpeggios into jazz licks, adding scale melodies, chromatic notes and enclosures, all the building blocks that make it sound like jazz. And that is what I talk about in this video, which will give you a good overview of what to learn and more importantly, how to use it. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.